I'm on a mission like a couple spies, and that, guys, is the reason why I catechize.
Welcome to the Reformed Standard. I'm Tony. Let's get started. Question 15 of the Westminster Larger Catechism reads, what is the work of creation? Answer, the work of creation is that wherein God did in the beginning, by the word of his power, make of nothing the world and all things therein, for himself, within the space of 6 days, and all very good. So this is an interesting question and answer, in that it on one level seems very straightforward and probably confirms some of our pre-existing notions, but there's a little bit more to the story. So this breaks it up into a couple different sections, so we'll just work through it a little bit at a time. So it says that God created the world by the word of his power. So this ties back to Genesis chapter 1, where it says, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, and then it goes on to say, and God said, let there be light. So this is talking about the 6 creation days in Genesis 1, when it talks about the word of his power. Now what's interesting, and the divines certainly pick up on this, is that they also connect to John 1, where Christ is called the Word, and then it's said that all things are created through him. So as we talked during our Nicene Creed series just a little bit ago, the divinity of the Son is established in Scripture and in the Nicene Creed and by the Westminster divines by associating him with the works of God, works that only God can be said to do. And chiefly of all of those is creation. And so we see right in the opening pages of Genesis 1, the very first 3 chapters, we see the full Trinity on display. Because in Genesis 1 and 2, we see the Father speaking. In Genesis 1:3, we see the Spirit hovering over the waters. And in Genesis 1:4, we see the Father speaking and creating by his word. And this is specifically said to be the word of his power, which is a phrase taken out of Hebrews chapter 1. And so we continue on, and it says that he made the world of nothing, or made of nothing the world. And so the divines here are affirming the historical doctrine of creation ex nihilo. And this is important because we don't believe in a God that created out of pre-existing matter, right? Genesis 1, God speaks into the nothingness and creates everything. So we're not talking about a pagan notion where there's some powerful being that exists alongside of creation, and so he forms or shapes creation. But instead we have this image in the scriptures, and this picture that the divines are painting for us in this catechism question, that God is all-sufficient in and of himself, and that there's nothing apart from God that makes God God. All that is in God is God, to borrow a classic phrase that James Dolezal picks up on for his recent book. And the divines here are affirming that by saying he creates of nothing. God did not require any sort of substance or being apart from himself to create from. He didn't shape it. But at the same time, he also did not take sort of pinch off a portion of himself and fashion that into creation either. So this concept that God speaks and creates out of nothing guards us both against sort of polytheistic notions, which we see in Greek polytheism, or probably more specifically in ancient Near Eastern polytheism, where there's pre-existing notions of matter and existence and being. But it also guards us against pantheism, or panentheism, which would argue that all things in fact are actually God, or panentheism, that all things are in God. Both of those notions are rejected here by this concept of creation ex nihilo. It extends the creation of the world to all things therein. So, of course, the divines, because the scripture is not, do not restrict this simply to what exists on earth. There was views around throughout history where the universe existed and there was other things, and this sort of looks at ideas that are coming back around with like John Walton's functional creationism, where there's the universe, and Genesis isn't describing the creation of the material universe. It's describing the functional forming of a habitation. It's making that creation functional. So John Walton doesn't deny creation ex nihilo as far as I know, but he says that the creation days in Genesis are actually the shaping and forming and making functional of an existing creation, which God had created at some prior unspoken time. And then this is the interesting thing that I want to sort of close us on, is the divines here note that the work of creation was completed within the space of 6 days. So we read this kind of post-Darwinian evolution, post-old age theory, old earth theory. We read this and we assume that they're restricting this to say that the earth was created in a short amount of time. And they certainly believed that they were not people who would have held to an old age or a long earth period, a long earth creation. But instead, they were actually responding to theology that was in the air, that the days of creation were revelatory in an accommodated way because God created everything instantly. And so they're actually saying that creation took longer than the theology that was floating around in the air of their day was saying. And this is not a view that was without precedent, right? Augustine said that all of creation was created instantly, and that the days of Genesis were listed out the way they were in order to accommodate the revelation to us, which is not too far from, I think, probably the right answer. It shares some similarities with the framework theory, which was made popular by Meredith Kline and others. And then finally, the question here indicates that all of this, whatever we mean by this previous stuff, all these previous phrases, which, the divines had specific things in mind, and the Reformed tradition as a whole believes mostly the same things about all of those things. But if we expand this last statement out, no matter what we mean, no matter what we understand about how God created, the process by which he created, the length or shortness of the days by which he created, what exactly it means that he created through the Son and by the word of his power, all of those things must be constrained by this final clause. And that is that all of creation was made very good. So God did not create the world in a way in which there was evil or sickness or illness, or fault or frailty. So this goes against Roman Catholic notions of concupiscence, in which Adam was created in a state where he was actually inclined towards sin, and he required some sort of super added grace in order to protect him from sin. The divines here are speaking strongly against that when they say that all of creation was very good. And so we can affirm with the Catechism that in the beginning God created all things by the word of his power in the space of 6 days for his own glory, and all very good.
Do you know, if you want, you could know this? The Catechism, hey, the Catechism, hey. Do you know what the chief and the man is? And how the Father, Son, and Spirit do manage? Do you know, if you want, you could know?
West Side.